Love talking to him, and now we get to the meat of the issues. The money man, Gary Sasse, and let's talk the incredible month-long delay in passing the Rhode Island state budget, and it was worth it because we accomplished
Nothing.
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 Wait. We've slowed down. We stopped government as we know it. We held off on passage of the state budget because we were looking to accomplish.
It was a lousy budget, but normal, predictable procedure indicates it's really nice to have a budget before the fiscal year starts.
Yeah.
And if there's a legitimate difference of a policy that could cost taxpayers a lot or change service levels, then that's fodder for a good public debate. And if you go a month over, you go a month over. You're arguing about what we were arguing about made no sense whatsoever. I think, I was on the speaker side in this debate because I think we needed orderly process in the budget. And once the budget was approved by the Senate Finance Committee, that was enough of a signal that they had reached an agreement,
Right,
regardless
that's right.
of what it says. But if you analyze it, let's see what we got, okay? We got something that, it kind of makes you scratch your head. The budget's passed, passed in the House, and what the Senate got was that in 2020 or 2021, we will do a study to see how well the car tax is being phased out. Truth of the matter is, by 2020 or 2021, we have already spent $120 million of the $220 million phase out. So that was not worth a month's aggravation. It was not worth a month's aggravation to cities and towns and to taxpayers not knowing when their car tax bills would go out. It was not worth a month's aggravation of not collecting taxes that were increased, predicated on a 12-month collection period, and now an 11-month collection period. So you explain to me what was accomplished. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, certainly it was one of the more insider games of politics. I don't think anybody really. I've heard stories from all sides. I'm not sure I completely absorb all of them or understand them all. And we weren't that far off from it really creating some chaos. Probably another 30, 60 days, and we really would have had some negative impact.
Well, the bottom line is you did not need CNN or Fox or MSNBC putting a map of the United States and showing 3 states in red who hadn't passed budgets.
Right.
You don't need that kind of publicity. And we joke about it, but if you're a person sitting off in Chicago or Memphis or wherever, and you're thinking about relocating your business to Rhode Island, and you look at that map, and that's not going to result in changing your decision, but
Can't help.
They can't help.
Yeah.
And it was whatever it was. It's hard to explain. It should have been worked out. It wasn't worked out. I think it's tremendously important for the state going forward to maintain the integrity of the budget process. And as we've discussed before, the House doesn't pass a budget unless they have concurrence from the Senate. And that is an implicit agreement. But the agreement becomes very explicit when the Senate Finance Committee takes an action unanimously in 13 minutes to approve the budget. The Senate Finance Committee is not going to do anything that the leadership of the Senate doesn't want done. So,
and listen, the House maybe once or twice has ever passed a budget without an explicit handshake agreement with the Senate leadership, because why would you? You'd just be ping-ponging the document back and forth till the cows come home.
I can remember some cases where the House passed a budget and all the T's weren't crossed and the I's dotted. There's 1 or 2 issues, but they kept on, working through, and the implied agreement was, we haven't agreed on this item or that item, but we can't be here until Labor Day, so let's get this process going, and we'll continue to work on it, and then the budget was passed. I think this was the second longest delay that I can remember. I think it was a 50-day delay at one point, but there were legitimate differences then. There were partisan, there were political differences. This was among their own party. This wasn't a Democrat-Republican split.
No.
These were 2 Democrats who got into this debate, And when you look at what the outcome was, you really have to ask yourself the question, okay, so what did the person that stopped the budget from going through get? Didn't get very much.
Didn't seem to. Really, the only major thing in the actual budget, there's some other bills still pending, but in the actual budget, is the phase out of the car tax. This is a big bill that's been debated for functionally 20 years now. And it is a policy change, and it is for the most part, appears to be a pro-taxpayer initiative.
It's definitely pro-taxpayer. We have some of the highest property tax burdens in the country. And, this gives a little bit, relief. The average taxpayer will get a few percentage points relief as a result of not paying the car tax. The governor would take exception with what you just said, though. I think she would argue that the free tuition for attending the state's community college was also an important legislative accomplishment. I don't necessarily agree with that, but certainly that would be the other thing people would point to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure a $2 million annual.
It's the principle. It's not the money. It's the principle that you can attend a community college for free. Interesting part about that. There are a couple of interesting things. We didn't do anything to help the community college. We have a very high dropout rate at the community college, a low graduation rate. We didn't deal with the quality issues. And low-income people that attend the community college, you're already pretty much getting it on the dime because of Pell Grants and other kinds of financial aid. So this makes it a little more accessible to upper middle class people. And I'm not quite sure what the outcome would be, but certainly was just to be responsive to your point. The governor would see that as a major accomplishment in this budget.
Center for Freedom and Prosperity came out with a press release today. I don't know if you saw it, announcing that they're still pending a number of bills that could move in the final days that would have an adverse impact, and they had a huge number, I think $6 billion, raising those concerns. Obviously, one of them is sick time. There's some others. Any thoughts about what's pending, or should they just close up and get out of Dodge?
Well, they have to act on what's pending because that was part of the agreement to bring it back and pass the budget. So I'm sure both the president and the speaker will be good to their word. As I understand,
at least this week.
Well,
right?
Yeah, there was some disagreement, but I don't think either went back on their word. But the bills that are pending are the sick leave bill. And the domestic violence bill, regarding guns.
I think there is agreement on that the marked up Senate version is going to be
and the other major legislation. I think there's some criminal justice reform legislation Senator McCaffrey is for that will probably come up at the end. And the other issue, which the Senate's committed to bring up, is the poor sox in the stadium. So I think there'll be 5 or 6 issues as far as what should be stopped. At this point, it's an academic question because the agreement's made that the fat's in the broiler, the pig has been cooked. And when you think about it, these are really ideological differences. On gun control and Second Amendment rights regarding domestic, the people that are charged with domestic abuse. Criminal justice reform, which I think we all agree we need to look at, particularly with the high cost ACI and some of the things that happened in the past. And the sick leave bill is very complicated. If you believe that strong family structure is critical to educational success, academic success of kids, if you believe that a strong family structure results in a more competitive, fairer society, that's one approach to looking at the medical leave bill. The other side is if you believe that there shouldn't be any mandates on business, you'd come up with a different point of view. What they intended to do in the legislature is act, and this is almost impossible with the wisdom of Solomon, and cut the baby in half. So now it exempts small business and it'll be the House bill that I would think would probably be agreed to pass. So now it exempts small businesses with 18 or fewer employees. There's a time limit on the number of sick days. Is that going to have a major impact on the cost of doing business? I don't know the answer to that question, but that's always the push and yang here. is if you believe that we need to have strong families to have prosperity, then you look at the medical leave bill differently than.
Well, you know, we came out editorial early on, very, very strong in favor of it. One from, it affects the restaurant industry from literally a public health issue. Listen, previous to Go Local, worked on the effort to ban smoking in the workplace, which affected restaurants. The restaurant industry said it would be the end of the restaurant industry as we know it in Rhode Island. Well, actually, the restaurant industry has grown substantially as a result of it. Family Leave Act was another one that was, if passed, would end commerce as we know it in Rhode Island. I worked for John Chafee at the time, and obviously it's been a huge boon and made quality of life much better. So I don't know. Listen, if it turns into such a disaster, it has the opportunity to be repealed.
Well, I think conservatives have to watch out for one thing. Entitlement programs, whether it's Medicare or Social Security, programs to strengthen the family need not be viewed as enemies by conservatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you want to be reasonable. You don't want to put in place a mandated family leave that really would cause economic distress to small business and other businesses in the state. And the question will be, did they go far enough in compromising so it doesn't cause that type of economic distress? But don't get yourself in a position, particularly people of my persuasion, of seeing these programs as being the enemy. They're not.
Right. So let's talk a little bit. Go Local had a story about tax stabilization. They are so in vogue. We look out here, and pretty much we don't have cranes and problems. We have one crane. It's over by the State House and that apartment.
Is it a bird or a crane?
It's an actual crane. It is a real live construction crane, and it's over by the State House. That project by the rail station, and it's a real crane. That's the only one in the city of Providence, but there's a lot of TSAs out there, Tax Stabilization Act, and Joe Palino's doing this building on the corner, which is going to be made into lofts. I believe they have a TSA as well as historic tax credits. Would any sane person ever come to Rhode Island and build a business without grabbing multiples of subsidies in this era? And does it create a two-tier structure?
Well, we're between a rock and a hard spot, and I would focus more on Providence and the state as a whole. In Providence, the tax burden on commercial property is probably 45 or 50% higher than Boston, and conversely, our rents are about 40 or 50% lower than Boston. Yeah. So if anyone is going to make an investment to encourage investment with these kinds of uncompetitive tax rates, they're going to look for a TSA. And you get yourself in trouble with TSAs because the cost of government doesn't go down, so you begin to shift the burden onto businesses that are already here.
Absolutely.
Onto homeowners. And yet it's one of those things that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. The TSAs can be powerful economic development tools, but like any powerful, and they have to be used in a place like Providence, who has.
But are we addicted to them?
We're addicted to the extent that we're not dealing with our structural problems, and we have a difficult time attracting any kind of investment and development without them. And then it's like anything else. If you overuse it, it becomes a problem. We
used to have 10-year TSAs. Now we're getting into 20-year TSAs.
Well, we got TSAs that we have a whole garden variety, a basket of TSAs.
Like vampires, you can't kill them.
Well, we have administrative TSAs, and these now don't require council approval. So if you're in a certain neighborhood, you can get a TSA for projects between, I think, $250,000 and $3 million. They're for 6 years.
Yeah.
Then there are administrative TSAs in Fire 195. If they're below 10 million, I think those are 15-year TSAs.
Jason Fain is asking for a 20-year TSA.
And now you can get a 20-year TSA in the I-195 district if the investment's over $50 million.
Right.
So we have those administrative TSAs.
Sure.
But that's not the end. Then we have TSAs approved by the city council.
Right.
And like anything else, that they can pick winners and losers, and those are 12-year TSAs. And just to give you an example of how lucrative they are, if I got a TSA from the city council, say for a $6 million, project. After 20 years, my taxes would be reduced by over $1 million.
Yeah.
My taxes would be reduced between 20 and 25%. And so the problem with TSAs is not that we should give up the tool, because we shouldn't give up the tool, but we got to use it much more strategically. And we have to administer them better. I see cases which I think are totally inappropriate, where somebody will get a TSA, a developer will get a TSA, and they'll come back into the city council and say, I need to extend it.
Oh yeah, that was Buff Chase
Yeah.
came back and said that he couldn't make the pay the bills if he didn't get
And see,
an
that's,
extension.
and so that's the dilemma. The dilemma is this: you need a TSA because at times there's kind of investments that are strategic that will lower the cost of investing. Will potentially have multiplier effects by a project being developed, and so you want to stimulate. You want
Sure.
to use a TSA, but we don't use it strategically. We just give them out. We don't administer them very well. I don't know who monitors these things. How well
Not well monitored. Mike D'Amico is interesting. Under Angel Tavares, the beginning of his administration, Mike D'Amico was the director of administration, was adamantly opposed to issuing TSAs and wanted to really get away from that as a public policy. Ultimately, he succumbed because there's just so much political pressure and development pressure on it. But it is looking a little bit like historic tax credits, where we end up taking a very good program that has very important strategic value, and we apply it to absolutely everything, and we get ourselves into trouble because hey, he got it, and he got it, and he got it, and he got it, so why shouldn't I get it?
Yeah, we need to have a TSA, but they should be used rarely.
Yep.
They should be used strategically. They should be monitored.
Should Jason Fain get a TSA on
I have no idea what Jason Fain's
the
project is.
big tall tower over on the 195 land, $200 million project?
That's, you're raising a very interesting question, because this I-195 development project is very unorthodox. Last time I looked, the land was in the city of Providence, but there's land in the city of Providence that is not controlled by this.
Most of it is not controlled by the city of Providence.
I think that was a poor administrative structure to go to. Is Fain's, we ought to have a rating system, and we ought to basically say that we're gonna give out 2 or 3 or whatever number of TSAs a year, and they'll be competitive, and they'll be rated, and the ones that score best we'll use, and the ones that don't score.
The 195 Commission hired an outside consultant out of Boston to review Fain's project, and came back and said the project's not viable. It's outside lending parameters, and would require a significant amount of capital infusion by the developer because it wasn't bankable. And then the committee voted, the 195 Commission voted 6-1 to pass it to the next approval process.
Well, then they're ignoring their own consultants, and then it basically, that's why when your government is in the business of picking winners and losers,
right?
They go out, they get a legitimate consultant, comes back and says this is not economically viable, and they say, oh shoot, politically we got to make a different decision. And that raises another question with some of these TSAs. I don't want to pick on Joe Paolino's across the street, but if these projects had a strong market, why would they need a TSA? And so you're really taking a big gamble with taxpayers' money, because if a project is not driven by market conditions and not markedly sustainable, and then giving somebody a tax break doesn't really result in return on investment that you want. And so the problem with the TSAs is not that we have them, it's the way they're being used, the way they're being administered, the way government decisions are being made. It's an absolute laughingstock that a city like Providence doesn't have a TSA. I went through the litany a second ago of 4 different types of TSAs. And so, it's a TSA du jour. It's just,
that's right.
What's going on.
Right. You get the special menu, and you can order up. Let's quickly go around the United States. They're down in Washington D.C. They're on recess, August recess. They can do no damage for the next few days. The president is on a 17-day working.
He really works. I don't think the guy he plays golf, but he doesn't really vacation. He does work.
They do say he's an absolute. I think he sleeps about. like Clinton sleeps about 3 or 4 hours a night. And,
Yeah, that's why we
uh,
need General Kelly to fix
yeah, that's
order
right.
this chaos.
Right. I'm surprised no Marine guarding the president hasn't had an accidental discharge and shot his phone so that he couldn't tweet anymore. But
Well, the
I
tweets
guess,
since General Kelly's been here, there've been tweets,
yeah,
but they've been
much
much
decreased.
milder
Yes, that's right.
tweets. They haven't offended people's fingers.
So what happens? We come back. We've got a budget issue. We've got a continuing resolution issue, right? We've got the debt ceiling. We've got budget. We've got all sorts of things.
Well, the things that have to get done are gonna make it very difficult to move the president's or the congressional legislative agenda. We need a debt continuing, we need to increase our debt.
Yep.
We need to change the debt ceiling. The Secretary of the Treasury suggests that if that's not done by the end of September, we have problems, we have budget to get out, and there's gonna be, real challenges, though, working with the various factions in Congress and the administration to get that. So that has to be the first order of business. We can talk about tax reform, we can talk about a lot of other
The
things.
Republicans couldn't possibly absorb a government shutdown. That has not worked out very well for Republicans.
No, but, and everyone hopes there will not be a government shutdown. But the Trump administration's been very clear, and I'll give them credit for this. They said we need to increase the debt ceiling, have the debt resolution, and a clean one without any
Yeah.
political strings attached to it. If anyone's going to attach political strings to it, then they'll be responsible for potential close down, and that could come either from the Democrats or it can come from a faction of the Republicans. But we haven't, seen that yet. But that's the first order of business. We got to be serious about, debt ceiling. We have to be serious about getting the budget resolutions passed. When that's done, then we can start talking about tax reform. And tax reform is not going to be easy. There's some real tough issues there.
So, way back in the day, my first job was John Chafee, 1985, and right out of the box was tax reform, the last major tax reform in U.S. history, 1986. It was a bipartisan, Bob Packwood, Bill Bradley, John Chafee, a bunch of members of the Finance Committee on the Senate side, Rostenkowski on the House side. It was, to put it mildly, a very contentious process.
But it was contentious, but we had adult supervision. Tip O'Neill,
Yep.
Ronald Reagan,
Right.
Rostenkowski,
Right.
Packwood,
Yep.
Bradley. Those, they were all different ideologies and all different ways to go about it, but they agreed that we needed tax reform, they agreed on a simplification, they agreed that we needed to make the structure more competitive, and they worked out a deal.
Right.
And any tax, bill requires the ability to compromise, and that's gonna be required, here. You really haven't seen the president's tax proposal, because it's on one page, and it's, not in any detail, but there are, some tough issues, and it is gonna have to be, worked through. And we have to distinguish whether we're talking about tax reform or tax cuts.
Yep,
'Cause
absolutely.
there's two things everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees, whether you're a liberal or conservative, Democrat, or Republican, that our corporate tax structure needs to be reformed, that it's not competitive, we have
Right.
some of the highest rates.
And it's having negative unintended consequences because so much money's offshored, and then we don't get the revenue from it regardless.
So we have to fix up the corporate tax. And the second thing I think people agree about is that we have to do something about simplifying the system. When the average working family, has to pay $200 to get somebody to fill out their tax reform,
Right.
something is wrong with the system. And so we have to simplify. We have to also recognize that there's a hollowing out of the middle class, and whatever tax programs we come up with have to put more take-home pay, in the pocket of working people. So those are the two things that need to be focused on. If they get off into all these kinds of tangents, there's one number that I, found interesting in the president's proposal, as limited as this, so the numbers are very preliminary. You're in the top 1%. If your family is making above $760,000, 90% of you will be getting a tax cut.
Yep.
The average tax cut will be about $196,000. If you're in the bottom 20%, your family's making less than 25 or 30,000. You're an individual making, 65% of you will get a tax cut, $100.
Yeah,
And,
that's not.
and whether, I think marginal rates should be lower. I don't think the marginal rate should be, as high as it is. But in this political climate, if you're going to compromise, you have to assign what your priorities are. And if the top can't, not 1%, can't get a tax cut because a higher priority is corporate tax reform, or a higher priority is simplification to get more money back in the pockets of the middle class, who will actually spend the money. Because it doesn't do you, if you want to use tax cuts to incentivize the economy, it's giving
The
a tax.
trickle-down theory has not worked very well.
Well, sometimes it does. I'm not totally, sometimes President Kennedy said, "What a rising tide lifts all boats."
Yeah, David Stockman said he might have been wrong.
Well, he was a sailor, Stockman wasn't. But in this case, it's political malpractice to think that you have to give a tax cut to the top 1%.
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
absolute political malpractice. And so the priorities are, now people may disagree with what I see as the priorities, but it's doing something to make our corporate tax structure competitive, because I think you can make the case that with a more competitive corporate tax structure, you'll have more investments, which will eventually grow jobs, and it's simplification, and it's simplification for the middle.
Isn't this a good time to do it? I mean, say what you want about whether it's the Obama economy or the Trump economy. Economy's starting to cook. Stock market pierces 22,000. Jobs number consecutively, month after month, have been pretty high performing. I think it was 210,000 new jobs. And shockingly, probably the biggest surprise number was GDP being reforecasted up to 2.6, which we haven't had 2.6 in a significant period of time.
Well, we had one quarter with Obama about 2.7, but no, you need it, one quarter doesn't make a
No.
forecast, but,
Right.
the goal has to be is what policies can you put in place to achieve 3% growth in GDP?
Right.
Because 3% growth then is real growth, otherwise you're growing, slightly faster than inflation. So, we'll see, what happens, and sometimes government getting out of the way is not a bad
Yeah.
way to grow
Right.
the economy. The interesting thing is, for the last 7 or 8 years, we've had about the same rate of growth. Since Trump has been president, we've grown about 1 million jobs. In the last 6 months of the Obama administration, if you go back and calculate it, which I haven't, but my memory would be that we grew roughly the same
Yep.
number of jobs.
Yep,
So we've
almost
had,
exactly.
so we were, in the 7th or 8th year of what I would define as a modest recovery.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a critical test for a Republican administration. Is by the time we come to 2020 in the next election, will we have broken out? Will we have broken out from the kind of 1 to 2% growth in GDP and be in the 3% range? If we are, all the other things that we've talked about and all the misdeeds and the chaos, et cetera, people are going to be working. They're going to be having good paychecks.
Yeah, the one hole in the economy continues to be real growth, wage growth, adjusted for inflation for the middle class, and that's the big hole that still hasn't been filled.
It's been a little bit better the last couple of quarters.
Yeah.
But that's a big factor.
Got a long way to catch up.
And also the labor utilization.
Yeah.
Rates. Our labor utilization rates, used to run about 68%. Now it's down to 64%, and so that talent has to be brought back into the workforce. And so, we'll see. But that's why I think there are a couple of things that you feel pretty certain about would be helpful. No guarantees. We've got to be fiscally responsible with federal budget.
Right.
Got to have a debt ceiling without, chaos. So there's predictability. Need a reform tax structure. And then we need to be strategic in our spending. And the strategic spending is on investing in research and development. The federal government has a very important role to play in investing in research and development, which would lead to innovation and growth. And have a blinder on. Don't let every social welfare group come in and say we have to double or triple entitlement programs when we're operating with the kinds of deficits that we operate on. So it's doable if it's focused. But the key thing is leadership, and somebody's going to have to bring both parties to not to the middle, because Republicans are going to be on the right, Democrats are going to be on the left, but to a point where they can work with each other. And there's some things happening on Obamacare replacement, now, which indicate that that may be possible if they're willing to compromise.
When you are able, please leak that to us.
About the Obamacare?
Yeah, in
I
a
can
brown
try-
paper bag.
Well, I could tell you there are 5 questions that are the obvious ones, so this won't be a bad leak. Should we try to climb the hill one more time and try to repeal it? Because, not having any action after 7 years of promising you would do something is a question.
Did you hear somebody is filing a lawsuit against the Republican Party for promising to repeal Obamacare in the first and has not?
Well, if somebody files a lawsuit each time a politician makes a promise and doesn't deliver on that promise, this is going to be a mighty poor lawyer. The second issue is how and where to work with Democrats, and I'll give you one example. Lamar Alexander,
Sure.
who I worked with years ago in Tennessee, is willing to talk about a 1-year extension in the subsidies, to keep the exchanges going.
Yeah.
But he wants a quid pro quo in return for that.
Sure.
And the quid pro quo in return may be to give states flexibility in what kind of insurance policies they sell. So there could be less expensive. And that's the second question. Can we work with the Democrats to get that done? Another thing which people don't know right now is the CHIP program, which is
Right.
a child health program, which is extremely popular, both bipartisan. It comes up for renewal in September.
Right.
Can we put any bells and whistles on the CHIP program if they want to extend it? That's a possibility. And then the other issue is, what do you do in the counties that have nothing? Last time I looked, Kaiser, I think, had published a report where there were 17 counties that had no insurance
None.
coverage.
Right.
And so those are the 5 questions, and can you maneuver your way through, not on a permanent solution, to deal with those kinds of questions? And the Republicans will have to get something that shows progress towards replacement. The Democrats will look for something to maintain the subsidies at least for another year. And is there a soft spot between those 2 positions?
Absolutely.
And that's what's being, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that that's what's being discussed there now.
I appreciate it. As always, Mondays are, rock and roll on the fiscal side. Appreciate all the insights. And don't forget any of those piles over there of cash that you brought in with you.
But they're Confederate dollars, I can tell you.
They're Confederate dollars. Last question. Any update on the Bob Flanders race?
I have no updates.
We want some updates. Next week when you're on, we want a Bob Flanders Sheldon Whitehouse update. Maybe you can bring Bob with you and bring him on over. We appreciate it.